Great. Good morning to our speakers and viewers who are tuning in via Facebook and other social media platforms to join us in this high-level webinar on the prospects and economic priorities for durable peace in Afghanistan. My name is Hiba Qasas. I'm the head of Secretariat for the Principles for Inclusive Peace Initiative here at Interpeace. It's my pleasure to moderate this webinar. This webinar is jointly organized by the Afghan Institute for Strategic Studies and Interpeace. I would like to pass the floor to Dr. Dawood Moradian, the Director General of the Afghan Institute for Strategic Studies, for his opening remarks. Dr. Moradian, the floor is yours.
Good morning to all of you, particularly our distinguished panelists, and also friends and colleagues around the world who have joined us in this virtual meeting. This is an important day because today is also International Day of Democracy. So I must congratulate my partner at Interpeace to choose this date to celebrate International Day of Democracy also. Also, we were fortunate to be in a week that the negotiation between the Afghan government delegation and the Taliban started a few days ago in Doha. So it is a peace week in a way in Afghanistan. So we are very fortunate to have this meeting in this particular time. My brief intervention would be on the economic aspect of the peace settlement in Afghanistan. As we all know, Afghanistan is one of the most complicated and multifaceted conflict. And the economic drivers of the conflict is an important cause of the war and instability in Afghanistan. Therefore, we have to take into account the economic dimension of the peace settlement here. We have heard from our Western partners that they use economic leverage, economic factors as a negotiating tactic with the Afghans, in particularly with the Taliban, and the promise or the threat of economic assistance to future Afghan government has been cited consistently in the statement and remarks by international partners. Now, the question that we ask is that to what extent the Taliban are responsive to economic leverage? To what extent the Taliban are driven by economic factors? Again, we have not enough time to go in deep on this question, but I don't see the Taliban primarily as an economic actors. Taliban are part of pan-Islamist movement. They have political, they have a ideological priority and mission. Therefore, I don't see economic as a very important driver that would affect the Taliban's calculation. Because Taliban's objectives are principally ideological, not necessarily economic. Therefore, I don't see any prospect that the Taliban would be responsive to any kind of economic leverage or even economic threats to affect their calculation. And the reason is that as we saw when the Taliban were in powers, they were not taking care of the economic need of the population who were there under their control here. Yes. Now, the way forward from the Taliban perspective, again, they don't need Western aid assistance because now they have two rich partners. One is Qatar. Qatar is a rich country, and Qatar has presented itself to the Taliban as the future central bank of a Taliban-led government in Afghanistan. Qatar has been using dollars to support Islamist movement around the world, Islamist government in Turkey, in Iran. Therefore, Taliban are looking at Qatar as a potential central bank. Another emerging partner for the Taliban is China. China again has presented itself via Pakistan that as not only as a geopolitical partner of Taliban, but also as an economic sanctuary for the Taliban. Therefore, and sadly, I do not see too much influence of the Western Western developmental assistance to affect the Taliban's calculation. Therefore, we all have to look at other factors to bring a durable peace in Afghanistan, and the economic leverage sadly would not impact Taliban's calculation in becoming a responsible partners, stakeholder in a peace settlements. I stop here and I would listen carefully and attentively to my colleagues on the panels.
Thank you very much, Dr. Moradian, for your thoughtful remarks. You raised very important questions on the incentives of the Taliban and their receptivity to economic leverage or threats. These are all important questions for our speakers also to reflect on in their interventions, but also for the international community to consider in their engagement strategies. As you said, Dr. Moradian, this event comes at a particularly relevant time. You described it as the Peace Week in Afghanistan. It's timely also with the recent talks in Doha and ahead of the Afghanistan Pledging Conference. So in this discussion with our distinguished speakers, we will have an interactive dialogue with 3 rounds of questions to our speakers, who represent both the views of Afghanistan, government and academia, but also the views of the international actors. We will first discuss the viability of the peace process, and then in our second round of questions, we will dig deeper in the economic sources of conflict and challenges to peace processes. Then we will move to questions from the audience, and our audience have been very active and already submitting a group of very interesting and challenging questions. In the interest of time, I will not be presenting the impressive bios of our speakers. Those are available in the invitation. I will move to our first speaker in this discussion, to Dr. Nematullah Bizhan. Dr. Bizhan is a lecturer at the Australian National University, a research fellow at the Afghan Institute, and he has recently authored an impressive piece of research on the prospects and economic priorities for a durable peace in Afghanistan. Dr. Bizhan, in your paper, you state that between 2020 and 2024, Afghanistan will need an average of $6 billion in grants and $3 billion in domestic revenue annually to sustain a peace process and the progress made to date. In light of the current global economic slowdown and the very strained financial envelopes in the era of COVID-19, how can a peace process in Afghanistan be economically sustained in the current context? Over to you, Dr. Bizhan.
Thank you, Hiba. Salam to everyone, and it's great to be a part of this wonderful panel. Also, a special thanks to Afghan Institute for Strategic Studies and the Interpeace for this wonderful opportunity. So I would like to take a broader look first. In the paper, I have examined the prospects and economic priorities for a durable peace. What I'm making the case is that reaching a political settlement between the Afghan government and the Taliban is only a part of solution. And another important part is how can we economically sustain a potential peace agreement or political settlement in Afghanistan. And for us, it seems that the trajectory from war to peace in Afghanistan will be far more complicated than was the case from peace to war. The key findings of my paper demonstrate that in order to sustain a post-settlement order, we need to sustain the gains, strengthen the national economy or revive the national economy, and reintegrate the ex-combatants. And to achieve these priorities, to make sure these are happening, Afghanistan will need substantial amounts of funding in the form of international grants. So just to come and briefly touch base about these three priorities that I'm making the case, or how those can be sustained financially. Coming to the gains, essential public services needs to continue and also to be expanded, because after reaching a political settlement, those areas which were insecure will require access to quality essential services. That's one thing. Second, in order to maintain order and deliver these services, Afghanistan needs to maintain and also strengthen public institutions which were strengthened and rebuilt after 2001. And then the third important priority will be to reintegrate the ex-combatants into civilian life and offer them employment opportunities. But that should be inclusive, because if the focus should be only on one group, this may discourage others to stop fighting. So that's why it should include the Taliban fighter and also those militias or armed groups which allied as part of the people uprising in Afghanistan. Saying that, an estimate shows that there will be around 60,000 Taliban fighters, and if you add the other armed groups, this number will increase. So meaning that will increase the pressure on Afghanistan. So now the question is, how can we achieve these priorities, and what the international community can do, as you highlighted. So we need to promote economic development and pave a path to self-reliance. Historically, sources of financing has been important to stability and also development in Afghanistan. And although Afghanistan is a prospective resource-rich country, but yet it's not able to finance its operating and development budget. An estimate shows that in the next 5 years, Afghanistan annually will need at least 6 to 8 billion in international grants and 2 to 3 billion in domestic revenue. So that means each year, on average, Afghanistan will need up to $10 billion for the next 5 years. So out of it, 72% needs to come from international community in the form of international grants. So the question here is, historically, the loss of external source of revenue has triggered regime instability in Afghanistan. And what the situation looked like, that how to finance the peace. And financing a peace in Afghanistan will be much less than financing a war or burdening the cost of the war. Although if we are in a situation thinking of like a best case scenario, though we need to be realistic, again, that these will not be adequate to promote a durable peace or to build a durable peace. Afghanistan needs an inclusive political process and also inclusive development to sustain a post-settlement order. I stop here.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bizhan. You shared a sobering picture around the challenge of financing the peace and raised important questions around the reintegration of fighters, around the revenue needs and how ambitious those are. And I think this is the perfect segue to go to our next distinguished speaker, the Minister of Economy, Dr. Mustafa Mastoor. It's a real pleasure to have you with us, Minister. We often hear of the immense challenges for a settlement with the Taliban, politically, economically, and from a human rights perspective. How will your government address the economic dependency of the Afghan economy towards self-reliance? And ahead of the international conference for Afghanistan in November, what support do you expect from the international community to support the Afghani government in proceeding forward?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. First of all, good evening for Dr. Nemat, who is Far East, and then good afternoon for those of us who are around Afghanistan, and good morning to many of you who are in Europe. And it's a great pleasure that after a long time I'm seeing Ambassador de Mistura, Scott, at least Dr. Bizhan himself, my great friend and my predecessor in Ministry of Finance, and also Sarabi said after some time. But before starting, I would like to make one small correction. Since yesterday, I'm not a Minister of Economy anymore. Yesterday, there is a very able lady has been introduced by the cabinet. So now you can call me former Minister of Economy. But since yesterday, I didn't have the chance to call you and make that correction. Anyway, I would like to thank the Afghanistan Institute for Strategic Studies and also Interpeace for organizing this very important webinar. And also I would like to thank and congratulate Dr. Bizhan for this very important and timely paper about the economic perspective and challenges in a post-settlement order. Coming to your questions, which has mainly three main parts. At least another information that from today on, I will work more on peace and the economic mix of peace. So I will work more on the post-peace recovery plan with the Office of High Council for National Reconciliation. You all know that history has been made. We witnessed the historic launch of the intra-Afghan negotiation on Saturday in Doha. The negotiation teams are working with each other, but as you mentioned, there are lots of unknown that we all want to know. At least from the Republic side, two major issues were on the agenda. The first one is the ceasefire, and preferably a comprehensive one. And the second one is preservation of the gains made in the last 2 decades, including development, economic related, and also freedom of speech, human rights, including women's rights, and girls' education, and etc. But you all may agree with me that in Afghanistan, after 42 years of conflict, 25 years of which was with Taliban, and all major countries in the region and beyond, they were involved. So it is a very complicated situation, and I agree with Dr. Muradian on this. We all know that the war had its cost, but the peace has its cost too, as well as its benefits. Colleagues, at the moment, we are spending 1/3 of our budget on security, and 1/3 of our budget on the reconstruction of what is damaged by the conflict and war. So it means that we only left by 1/3 to manage everything else. And this need to be ended. And we know how big opportunity would be, not only for us, but also for the Taliban, if we coming to a peace deal, so that we don't spend that big amount or 2/3 of our budget on the conflict-related activities. We have, as I mentioned earlier, we had big gains, not only on the hard side, but also on the soft side. When we're talking about institutionalization, service delivery, reforms, enabling the business environment, all of these things needs to be preserved. And this is the Afghan negotiation, or the Republic side negotiation team job. Indeed, one of the biggest challenges that we will face, regardless of whether there will be a peace or not, is the issue of self-sustainability. Though all of us, we are looking forward for peace, but the self-reliance and self-sustainability is a big issue ahead of us. But if there is peace, probably in our journey to achieving self-reliance will be somewhat shorter. At this moment, donors are funding about 75% of total public expenditure in Afghanistan, including off-budget and on-budget, both in security and development. Analysis by the World Bank and the Biruni Institute showed that the financing gap will decline to only 18% of the GDP, but still equivalent to something around 8 billion by 2030, meaning that the country will continue to rely on donor assistance for the foreseeable future. I do agree with Dr. Bizhan about the 6 billion from donors and 3 billion domestic, but the amount only is not important. Where it is allocated, how it's allocated, how efficient and effective it is, that is most important. And you might have heard the leaders of the country also. Coming to the second and third part of your question, excuse me for the taking time. The bigger issue I see for the country, at least for the last 20 years, was that we spent the financing on the areas which was less productive. And this was why the economy didn't grow much. At this moment, fortunately, the market is very big. The purchasing power of the Afghan people, it's around $10 billion a year. However, 7.5 billion of this is spent on imports. It means that we are sending $7.5 billion out, only received goods, some of goods that we can easily produce inside. This huge deficit in balance of payment is not healthy for the economy, and this gap always filled by the ODA. We have to recapture this market so that we improve the balance of payment. And you know that the revolving effect of this amount, if it is used for domestic products, is huge. In Ministry of Economy, when I was there, we developed a multi-purpose or multi-dimensions strategy, which was called Productive Afghanistan. And it was targeting 10 main items which can be easily produced in Afghanistan so that the balance of payment are improved, jobs are created, growth is helped, and poverty is reduced. In the meantime, another big program that we developed there was women economic empowerment. At this moment, around 5.7 million Afghan ladies who are in the working age, but they are not economically active. They are mainly as housewives, and they cannot help their families. And this women economic empowerment programs for the rural areas, it will help that 5.7 million people, how they could earn, even if it is $2 a day, it will be $60 a month for their families. Another program that we worked in the Ministry of Economy, which linked to this productivity issue, is one province, one product. We want to add value to the products, specific products of each province, and also linking it to the market so that those products will help the economy of the rural areas. A part of that, post-peace, we are expecting more regional projects. We already have initiated few, but due to security reasons, they could not start it. And we are very much happy that based on all these programs were based on the ANPDF, what Ms. Sarabi helped a lot and actually was the main person behind the ANPDF one. And we are very happy that now the market building, a part of the peace building, is a big component of ANPDF2, which will be presented in Geneva. So that focus will help us to enable the environment for the private sector. And coming to your last part of the question, so not only the amount is important for us, but predictability is important, and where it is allocated. So we hope that it is more on the economic enablers rather than all on the social protection. So by this, I stop here, but I will come to relevant issues when there are next questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mastoor. It's a pleasure to have you with us as a former minister, and we welcome your successor as well in her new role. It's great to see a female Minister of Economy in Afghanistan. Dr. Mastoor, you've summed it in a very eloquent way. War has its cost and peace has its costs too. You reminded us of the difficult trade-offs the government has to face and the challenge of sustaining peace and preserving the gains in the areas of human rights, women empowerment, and state institutions. I also heard a word of caution from you to the international community, how the devil lies in the details, and that it's not only the revenue and amounts needed and invested what matters. It is also how and where they are invested to make the desired outcome of sustaining peace and avoid unintended consequences as well. So I thank you very much for that contribution, and I will be back to you with some additional questions. And with this, I would like to move to Ms. Naheed Sarabi. Ms. Naheed Sarabi is a former Deputy Minister at the Ministry of Finance. It's a pleasure to have you with us. Ms. Sarabi, 2019 was the 6th consecutive year in which civilian casualties topped 10,000 people. The economic cost of violence was the 2nd highest in the world after Syria. However, there have also been substantial gains in recent years. We've heard some of that from our previous speakers. An increase in the GDP per capita, life expectancy was raised from 44 to 61, school enrollment increased. We have seen also progress in women empowerment. Do you have hopes that these gains can be sustained in a potential deal with the Taliban? What should be done to protect these gains and advance forward, in your opinion? Over to you.
Thank you so much. A very good morning, good evening to everybody. I'm truly honored to be part of this panel, especially some of my mentors and people who I've learned a lot from them are part of this panel, and it's very great to hear from them, their perspectives. Thank you for the organizers, and a very warm welcome to the participants here. A very interesting question, Hiba, and when you said how if there are hopes that these gains could be maintained, I think the purpose is that these gains need to be maintained. And all the effort should be directed to maintain these gains. It's not only maintain, and it's to expand upon them. Peace for people of Afghanistan is not reversion. So anything we do is how we can take Afghanistan forward. And as you mentioned, there have been many gains, but to protect and preserve these gains, there are costs and needs for them. There are 2 dimensions I want to discuss here, and if I may allude a little bit on the economic side of it, which the previous panelists have described in detail. In the past years, we've had good economic growth, but let's also note that the economic growth has lagged behind population growth, and this has caused poverty, and per capita income has declined. There has been good progress on revenue, but still revenue consists only 49% of our budget. And with the situation we have in terms of pandemic, it might even decline this year, but it will revive in the next coming years as predictions show. It has tremendously declined since 2010, 2011, where we had a peak. And that's why there were less economic activities and less jobs. Afghanistan's GDP is, in the past, has been very dependent on agriculture, which itself is a very volatile sector. So seeing all these challenges and what Afghanistan is facing in the peace process, if we have ex-combatants who come and integrate, we had a bit of discussion around that. And also we have more than 400,000 young entrants into the job market annually. We have had in the past 5 or 4 years around 4 million refugees returning to Afghanistan. So all these people need services, and they put fiscal pressure on the government to deliver services. Now, how these fiscal pressure need to be addressed? As Dr. Mastoor mentioned, Afghanistan put forward 2 strategic development frameworks in the past. One was in the Brussels conference, and then the next will be submitted in the Geneva conference, which puts forward its plan for self-reliance. But I think we need to be very realistic in how Afghanistan can achieve self-reliance in the next coming years. I think with all these challenges, if we consider Afghanistan still will be highly dependent on aid and will need support if a sustainable and durable peace is to be achieved. If services are to be delivered to people, if we have to maintain the same level of provision of health, education, attending to minorities, vulnerable groups. Afghanistan is a post-conflict and kind of in the middle of conflict. We have many households who are headed by women. We have martyrs, we have families who are disabled. And the part of social transfers need to be really attended to. The issue, as discussed before, is not that Afghanistan still needs and will be highly dependent on international support and donor assistance going forward, but also how it will be transferred. We have always seen in the past that the amounts pledged to Afghanistan and the amounts that are committed and then finally dispersed through the government or even outside the government systems, there's high level of variance. That is one point. The second is a very project-wise approach, which I think needs to be changed into more programmatic and result-oriented actions. The third is, I think there has to be a tandem between political actions on the peace process and the economic realities on the ground. And as an Afghan citizen and somebody right now looking things from outside of the government, the military and political settlements are going like a thick box without looking into realities, without assessing if Afghanistan at the end of the day, the institutions are really strong enough to carry the burden or the fiscal pressure or the service delivery pressure after the peace process. So that's one side. The second is more on the social and legal aspect of it, and that no economic gain can be maintained without right legal framework or governance structures. And a very important thing to maintain these gains is maintaining and preserving the Constitution of Afghanistan, that itself refers and calls upon balanced development, provision of social and economic rights to all people of Afghanistan. And there's a specific reference to women and girls' education in the Constitution itself. And in the peace process, that should be a very important thing to insist upon. We have had many gains with regard to women rights. Just today, I heard the news that Afghanistan is a member of the UN Commission on CSW. I think that's a very good step forward. So such activities, such actions and initiatives need to be maintained. We need more women in the police force. We need more women in the rule of law. We need more women in the government at a high ranking and in the civil service. So the base is a good progress, but it's not enough. So the question at the end of the day is provision of services to everyone in an inclusive manner. And I agree with Dr. Bizhan on this issue. He had put it very clearly, but also at the end of the day, more is needed. It's not the issue of maintenance of these gains, but also expanding upon them. So I stop it here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Sarabi. You started with a very strong message, which really resonated with me. It's beyond hope. We need to be intentional to protect these previous gains. It's not really an option, it's an imperative. And I think that's a spirit that, that the strong message, both internally and to the international community, need to be conveyed. You also reminded us with the need to be pragmatic and realistic in light of the fiscal pressure the Afghani government faces with the needs of public services and the need to be realistic about those, but also the importance of linking the political track with the lived experiences and expectations of the populations, so we can actually move towards sustaining peace. And investing in public services, as you said, in education, in women's empowerment, and in livelihoods are important factors as policy strategies. With this, I think it is a perfect segue to move to Mr. Staffan de Mistura. It's a real pleasure to have you with us. You were, Ambassador, you were the UN Secretary General Special Representative to Afghanistan, Iraq, Lebanon, and the Special Envoy for Syria. You have seen it all. And Afghanistan has been in a web of international military, political, and financial engagement. Over 112 billion US dollars in development and security assistance were invested between 2002 and 2015. Ahead of the International Donor Conference in Afghanistan in November, what does the international community need to do differently in supporting an Afghan peace plan that includes the economic dimension? And I would love to hear your thoughts about if you have any concerns regarding the lack of inclusion in the peace process that is ongoing now. Over to you, Ambassador. Ambassador, would you unmute your mic, please? We cannot hear you. We still cannot hear you, Ambassador. I can see that your microphone is muted.
Now it is. Now it is.
Thank you very
fine.
much.
Thank you. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. I have been 3 times in my life, professional life, involved in Afghanistan. So I'm very, very close to Afghanistan. And there were different periods of its very complicated history. So I feel very strongly about what is happening at the moment, like I'm sure many Afghans, and I concur with virtually everything except a little at the point that I will relate to, but only partially, which I've been hearing so far. So first point, this is an historic moment. We all recognize it, and the Afghans recognize it. This is a wonderful, unthinkable window of opportunity. I couldn't think a few months ago that this would have been actually happening. The 2 sides were not even recognizing each other. So we should give credit, due credit to, to Mr. Pompeo, to Khalilzad, Ambassador Khalilzad, and to the convening power of Qatar, and to the, in particular, the courage and determination and vision of the Afghans, whoever they are, in wanting to end this horrible conflict, 42, 43 years of horror. Everyone wants that. Those who have been involved militarily, and they are ready to pay a ticket for getting out, so that can be a contribution financially, in order to live their engagement, which has been going on for more than 18 years. And the Afghans are all tired of that horror. So let's look at the good news. This is good news. And the other good news is that there are quite the commonalities. And I'm sure you, Afghan friends, will probably be able to confirm it. There are commonalities between the 2 sides. The pride of being an Afghan, history has proven it. The Afghans are incredibly proud, and therefore proud of being Afghans. And that, in a way, has shown over history towards anyone who has been trying to over-influence their history. Their belief in territorial unity, their believing in their territorial integrity, their acceptance with de facto for many centuries of this mosaic of the diversity. And the feeling that in spite of having friends, and they will have friends, and they continue having friends, they have a reluctance of excess of foreign influence. So neighbors, in spite of having been very much involved, are by and large feeling comfortable about these new developments. So where is the problem? Well, the problem is what you said, the devil is in the detail, and above all, the lack of trust by both sides. But we have seen that in Syria and anywhere else, we have been having negotiations taking place. The lack of trust needs to be overcome. And that's what the negotiations details will try to prove. Now, when we go into negotiation details, there are many ways that one can look at them, and you have touched them. But there is one, and you have touched it very well, it's the economic aspect. And there, I want to believe that the economic aspect will have and can have, if properly used, a substantial leverage. Leverage on the population by giving them hope and feeling of sustainability. In other words, you need money to sustain peace, to integrate ex-fighters and so on. And B, you need to make sure that once people return home and start having finally priority one, which is ceasefire, no doubt, but immediately after the ceasefire, 1 month after, there will be a request about where are we on the sustainability. The donors conference will be crucial. And here we get into the critical part. If the negotiations continue to be constructive, if the details of the negotiation will produce a feeling of, even in the most democratic country or non-war affected country, there are debates, discussions, disagreements, no problem. Even walking in and walking out of a room for a moment. But if all this leads to a certain form of a common understanding, then the secret will be, one, what ministries will be one side or the other have, and that is crucial in many ways. And secondly, what type of rules of the game regarding what has been achieved and what needs to be added in order to accommodate the others, and how the constitution can be seen in terms of what has been achieved. Now, there is where my experience in the Tokyo Donors Conference plays a role, because I do remember that was the case, and how the Tokyo Conference had an impact in linking aid to some type of sustainable peace. And we may get into more details, and therefore is where I would like to elaborate further on the role of the European Union, perhaps not so much the US at this stage financially, and Qatar and China. And all that having in one form or the other a leverage for one, and I conclude, thermometer. And forgive me for being very focused on that. There are always a thermometer of human rights. There are always a thermometer or a compass that will indicate to donors, especially public opinion, whether it is worth, especially at the time of economic crisis, especially at the time of a COVID crisis, that is worth investing for 5-10 years more in a country where so much blood has been spent by everyone, especially by the Afghans, and that is women. Women rights. Yes, human rights. Yes, what has been achieved, but women rights in particular. Why? Because they are 51% of the population. Because 18 years they've been progressing into something that was before unthinkable. We have doctors, we have judges, we have teachers, we have lawyers, we have policemen, we have soldiers, diplomats, journalists, parliamentarians, ministers now. Now, are we going to go back 18 years? One thing is not getting there and gradually getting there. And the other one is getting there and then losing everything. Now, I will stop for a moment simply by saying, I think even Qatar and China, who are, and I agree with you, Dr. Moradian, they will be interested in seeing stability in Afghanistan. but sustainability of that involvement would require also very much a European involvement. Then they too would have a problem in seeing that no women's rights which apply in their countries. Look at Sheikh Amona, who has been Moza, who had been actually involved in UNESCO so actively for education of women. Conclusion, the thermometer of the true trust that can be given by the foreign countries into what is a progress of human rights in spite of the situation in Afghanistan and the position of the Taliban probably is going to be where the women will be allowed to go to school beyond just alphabetic, learn to write and read. But can they go to university? Can they be, again, a doctor, a nurse, a professor, a judge, or not? If that will not take place, the Taliban will lose, once again, an historic opportunity of having what they care most, recognition. They're getting it now, a form of recognition, but it is a conditional recognition. I will stop there for a moment. Thank you.
Thank you very much for sharing your thoughtful comments, really, and remarks. I think you provided us with a reality check regarding the international interventions, their incentives, interests, and contribution, but also the importance of economic aspects in negotiations. However, what struck me most, as you describe it, is the thermometer of progress in human rights, and how women's rights are really central to this as an important factor in supporting and sustaining peace, but also in achieving international recognition. And I have witnessed personally how much you brought that into the Syria process and how much there was progress at times when it was very difficult without women's participation. So thank you very much for sharing these thoughts. And with this, we will move into a second round where we will be digging deeper in the economic sources of conflict and the challenges to the peace process. And I would like to go back to Dr. Bizhan. Dr. Bizhan, 80 to 90% of Afghanistan economic activities take place through the informal sector, including illicit activities. You've touched upon that in your previous intervention, but we would like to dig some deeper. Opium accounted for 4.5% of GDP in 2016, providing a source of income for many poor and landless farmers. How could a peace deal be supported by people currently dependent on the Taliban for economic or other reasons? Over to you, Doctor.
Thank you. For this, what I would like to do is to unpack the informal economy in Afghanistan. The informal economy is huge, but that's not the problem. So the government is not able to tax it. But the main problem is with illegal economy, including opium, which has high value and its value exceeds the total national export of Afghanistan. We need to think of economic incentives that the Taliban offer. So I classify those into three. One is the salary they offer to their fighters. In some places, it's reported that the fighters get more than what an army officer gets in Afghanistan. And the second one is, the second incentive structure is protection to opium cultivation by limiting the reach of government or law enforcement agencies. So corruption is another problem. I don't touch on that. So the focus is on the Taliban. And then extraction and illegal taxation. So we will witness that a parallel taxation system has been established in Afghanistan. People are paying taxes to the government, and also the Taliban are collecting taxes, especially this Hoshur. So these are burden on citizens. So now the question is, how can we change the incentive structures to encourage people to to not fight or to lay down their arms. So at least at this stage, there could be three mechanisms. One is the reintegration of the ex-combatants into civilian life, which I mentioned, but that's not good enough. They should also have access to employment opportunities. So that's one thing. And the other one is alternative livelihood to opium cultivation. This issue has been overlooked in the past because the alternative should be something with high value. So we have the case of saffron in Afghanistan, high value production. That could be a lessons learned. And the third one is something that people are scared and hesitant to talk, to explore approaches to allow limited production or legal production or cultivation of opium for medicine. So that could be also another way out. But the question here is to address these challenges. There will be need for substantial investment, which the Afghan economy and government do not have the capacity, or they lack the surplus. So again, it comes to the role of international community to finance these initiatives. But to conclude, I would like to highlight, which I also discussed in my paper, that the current political order in Afghanistan is like close to a limited access order. So what does it mean? That elites in power have access to economic resources and political power and have little incentive to fight each other. But this order is fragile because the Taliban, they also have access to alternative sources of power and informal economy or illegal economy, challenging the current establishment. So how does it seem that a possible settlement will look more fragile or will be more fragile than the current one? And to mitigate the risk, perhaps it will be necessary to establish a more stable order and to make both the political process and development inclusive. So bringing these together, the process will be complicated, and I would like to add one more thing, that any settlement that the actors will reach the Afghan government and the Taliban, it will only lead to a significant reduction in violence and not an end to the conflict, because we have other actors on the ground with access to sources of power and also financial resources from illegal economy. I stop here.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bizhan. And with those words that you've given to us, very wise and perceptive remarks, I wish to move to Dr. Mastoor to reflect on them. And Dr. Mastoor, what you've heard from Dr. Bizhan is the question of economic incentives. Very practical questions around salaries of the Taliban fighters. As part of the economic challenge is the eventual reintegration of Taliban fighters and other fighters. We heard that more than 60,000 Taliban fighters alone will need to find new livelihoods and be integrated into civilian life. We heard about the importance of looking into alternative livelihoods. How does the government of Afghanistan plan a disarmament, demobilization, and reintegration process that address these economic questions and doesn't undermine the general trust in the peace process?
Okay, before coming to this point, just one reflection to what Dr. Bizhan just mentioned. It's not only the other groups, but even Taliban themselves. We have had the experience of Mr. Hikmatyar. Mr. Hikmatyar himself joined us, but his foot soldiers joined Taliban. Also, the way Taliban, the whole force was working, they have given a specific autonomy to their local commanders, including how to find their own resources or financing. Some were involved in drug narcotics, some in mining, some in taxing people. So the peace in Doha simply means shutting the doors of their shops. So for me, it means that some of those local commanders, the ones who were finding their own resources and the ones who were creating a problem for the government forces, all were not in control of Taliban. And it may not be in control of Taliban because they should also see if there is any incentive for themselves as well, apart of all other 21 terrorist groups. But coming to your question, Hiba, I'm not an expert of DDR, and also the question of the number of 60,000 is not very much verified, whether it is 60, whether it is more than 60. But I always feel that there should be, instead of a direct approach of disarming, demobilization, I always prefer an indirect approach, how we can provide the economic opportunities for those people in the field. The DDR itself, I mean, the direct approach was not a good experience, and it was not realistic. I was talking on this in 2004, and I was talking on this in 2008 because of my experience of the country. I lived in this country, I worked in this country, and I know how those words, at least the DDR, came from outside, and it was not fully followed the way everybody was expecting it. I think it should be, it will be too optimistic if we think that the Taliban forces will come and become plumbers or carpenters or open a shop. I think not all of them. And we should see whether how many of them can be turned to a normal citizen and can be active in the economic activities. But how many of them can be absorbed in the setups such as in the armed forces? I don't say police, national police or national army, but for example, securing the gas pipelines, securing the electricity pipelines, or the public protection force, which are mainly protecting some areas, because the strength of these people are how to be somehow a soldier type thing. We should not expect everyone to come and become, as I mentioned, a shopkeeper or a plumber. So these economic opportunities, or the lack of these economic opportunities, turned many of them to join to Taliban. So that indirect approach, what I'm saying, is needed. We should make peace economically attractive for them so that they leave their forces. And though earlier Dr. Muradian was saying that Taliban is more an ideological force, but only those who are in the Quetta or in Doha or in Peshawar. But the rest of the people, not all of them joined them based on the ideology, because they didn't have anything to do, and this is why they joined them. So it is to us to find what are the local potentials to invest on. It may not be a one-size-fits-all to all part of the country to implement the same program. So the local economies, and the keyword which I repeatedly mentioned is the productivity or production, local production, how we can engage them in these type of things so that they become an active partner of it, not like programs before, which was only a program for 6 months or 1 year, and after 1 year again, these people were jobless. So this is how we need to support them, and somehow we should link them to these type of economic activities. It needs more customized interventions in rural rehabilitation and development. The DDR abbreviation itself, this term does not have a good connotation in Afghanistan, because usually everybody was, particularly our partners, they were engaged in the first 2 Ds, disarming and demobilization. But reintegration, in the way at least they proposed, they were too idealistic and maybe based on experiences of other countries. So I think that we need to change it. Maybe we change the DD to EE, economic empowerment. The economic empowerment of that, they are more important than only taking their guns. And that is what I think we need to do. I mentioned earlier that I'm working with the High Council for National Reconciliation on a post-war economic recovery plan. And this is where we want to put these things based on the experience of the past 19 years. This may convince the Taliban as well. And as I said, we should de-link the foot soldiers from their local commanders or from their leaders. And that will be the way to make the peace sustainable. Otherwise, if again, we only take their guns and we don't provide them economic opportunities, they will find gun. Again, they will find gun. And they are very innovative in these areas. My view here is that we should be realistic. Our programs will be realistic. So from instead of DDR, I will make it EER.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dr. Mastoor. A slight change, because I think you've provoked some really interesting perspectives. So I'm going to change the program a little bit and just do a follow-up question to you. You've talked about the absorption capacity of the economy with, for example, the ex-combatants, but also there is the question around the refugees. Currently, there are 1.3 million registered Afghans in Pakistan, for example. With peace comes return, and whether it's voluntary or involuntary. And that's a potential scenario. How will the country absorb this additional pressure in light of the pre-existing pressures to the economy? And should this be very high on the agenda of the international community in the international conference, in thinking about how the questions that were raised before by Ms. Sarabi and Dr. Bizhan about the how and where are we investing and the durability of that investment? And I would kindly ask you to try and answer me in 2 minutes. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Again, to be realistic, 2-3 times the opportunity created, but we didn't have all those refugees to return back, because some of them are really settled there, and even their host countries, they see to them as contributors to their economies. And this was why even some of them were provided certain immigrants card or something like that, so that those capitals to remain there. So this is why I don't expect that even if we have, first, the negotiation with Taliban will take time. We had 8 rounds of negotiation only with US, where we were expecting sooner agreement with them, but with us it may take even longer. And even if that deal is there, I don't think that the returnees issue will be an immediate issue for us before 3-4 years. What we should do and what the partners should do, we should not only again look to the returnees themselves and their need, but also to the host communities when these returnees are coming, how they distort the economic market, the job market. And many of them are coming with better skills. And this is where we in the Ministry of Economy, we are we are leading a project which is funded by the World Bank. It is a $200 million project called Easy Car, which is creating jobs in the host communities for at least 13 main provinces or main cities. So I think that will not be an immediate concern or immediate priority. I think many of those who are now in those countries, either they are settled, they have their jobs, they are having their education. So I will not put it as top priorities for the immediate 3 years.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mastoor. With this, I would like to move to Ms. Sarabi. Ms. Sarabi, our speakers today spoke of challenges and opportunities. In reflection, how should a peace process look like in order to help bridge these differences and enjoy local support and ownership? You touched upon that in your previous interventions, but would like to hear from you more about that aspect of local ownership, lived experiences, and expectations of local population.
Thank you so much, Hiba. I think there are two issues here. First, one is legitimacy and of government, how much it can gain or invest upon having that legitimacy from the communities and population. And the second issue is the ownership that comes from representation and how communities' demands are really reflected in what government does. Before even we go to any post-settlement scenario, what is really important is what our base looks like. If we don't have a strong base, it means there will be challenges in the post-settlement. And I think post-settlement scenario will be much more complicated than even with the peace process or before settlement scenario. So conflict, poverty has fragmented communities, or some part of the communities in Afghanistan across region, ethnic, or even gender or regional imbalances. How we can avoid this fragmentation, how we can work around this, and that is through, first of all, involving communities in the processes. One quick example is how our budgets are made every year, how the voices of these communities are reflected in the yearly budget of the government and the services or the development programs or economic programs that the government is implementing. It's a very valid question. If we want to work on the base and improve the base, this is the first thing to do. Second, in the peace process, I think involving communities as a monitor of the peace process is very, very important. They should harbor that peace brings them more benefit than war is. And they should see that, they should touch that. If a settlement does not bring them more economic benefit, does not bring them more services, then I don't think they will be really convinced to take the ownership and help government. The second issue is more around how we want the social cohesion to happen in the post-settlement scenario. There are also risks, there are also opportunities in the post-settlement in a fragmented or for social cohesion. First of all, if services are provided, it has to be in an inclusive, in a very holistic manner. If you target a population and then you do not touch the host communities, it will bring more hostilities than it will do any good for the communities, I'm afraid. So the population of Afghanistan, the people of Afghanistan need to be targeted in one equal manner. And based on the needs and demands that they bring on the table. The risk is if you do not treat them in an equal manner, in a comprehensive, in an inclusive manner, and as a whole, it will give rise to more fragmentation and hostility, which will complicate any post-settlement process. So for me, the ownership is more about how communities put their demands and how much job do we offer them. And I think with just to not to divert from the topic, I think in terms of provision of jobs, I know education and higher education is really important in terms of human capital, but what is really, really important, as Dr. Mastoor also mentioned, is vocational training and employability. Those opportunities, those areas that can really have an immediate effect in the communities. And a very important issue, again, I mentioned earlier, is representation. Communities need to feel that they are represented in the processes and that they own and they can monitor what is going on. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Sarabi, and thank you also for highlighting the importance of representation. With this, I would like to move to Mr. de Mistura. As UN Special Envoy and Special Representative, you had to maneuver different international, regional, and national dynamics and pressures. From your experience, what are some of the words of wisdom around strategy in terms of changing or maneuvering around the incentives of regional actors and organizations to be more conducive to peace and not to undermine it? And it is a very big question, I know, for a short period of time, but we are very keen to hear your perspective. Thank you. Mr. de Mistura, you're mute. Your microphone is muted.
Here we are. It is definitely a complex question, especially related to a very complex history and geographic position of Afghanistan. Afghanistan, as you know, is a mosaic of so many interesting, important communities which have all participated to the history and to the politics of the country. Secondly, the neighbors have been quite intrusive, and some of them quite actively so. But the things have changed. Things have changed radically. I think that from that point of view, we are in a moment of hope, because the neighboring countries have anyway a vested interest in stability now in Afghanistan, and probably don't have a feeling that any of them can make their own interest prevailing, and therefore have some type of military involvement. That's at least my hope at this stage. Otherwise, we would have not got this type of meeting taking place, because neighbors have an influence on the participants in the meeting. Second, I believe also that there is an opportunity, as we said before, through the donor conference for everyone to actually apply that type of leverage without prevailing on the other one. So, conclusion, I believe that thanks to what I hope will continue to be a feeling of hope, and we all have it, and you know, you want to have that one at this stage, there will be some progress in the negotiations. Imagine that the negotiations will not end up with a total clarity, but there will be commonalities, and those commonalities will be agreed. The donor conference will be, in a way, the occasion for exercising a just, hopefully not excessive, because Afghans should be and are proud, leverage on ensuring, one, that the agreement, whatever agreement takes place, will be respected and it will be linked to the donor conference outcomes. B, and there even Qatar, who has been having such a strong interest as a host country, will be probably having an influence, but also other countries, in particular, I believe, EU and China, I agree, and to a certain degree, the United States. But then there will be also a linkage to the progress. And the progress can be linked to, again, funding. Now, I know that the argument would be, yes, but the Afghans don't need this. It's not, as you know, the truth. There is a need of 6 billion and more. And that will be something that even the Taliban will feel very strongly, because if they're coming into a governmental environment will coincide with the collapse of the economy of Afghanistan, every person, average person, will feel that link. And they have learned one or two lessons. And I want to believe that they also, to a certain degree, are truthworthy when they say, we have learned those lessons. Conclusion, the bottom line of verifying all what we are saying will be the progress or not, and I hope yes, of the discussions, and B, the final test will be about the donors conference. And if I may insist, because I feel strong about it, looking at it from at least a large community of the international community, you need a verifying test for that. And it will be the way women progress will be or not recognized. I know there are many other aspects, many others, but that one alone will be an incentive or non-incentive for many countries to say, we are going to go an extra mile short of simply leaving Afghanistan. We have been there 18 years. Why should we be sticking around for further? There are so many other problems. Well, if the thermometer goes in the right direction, there will be an incentive for that.
Thank you very much, Mr. de Mistura, for this reality check and also strategic and tactical recommendations of how we can move forward. We have a large number of questions from our audience, many of which have already been answered during the interventions in terms of the impact on vulnerable population, how we can move from war economy to sustainable economic model, some of the points around preserving previous gains, participation, inclusion, and also a number of questions that are directly linked to the questions and the thermometer point that Mr. de Mistura raised around the important role of women and participation. And perhaps in the interest of time, I will take one question and from the audience to direct it to Dr. Bizhan, the question which I feel we have not unpacked enough and have not answered enough. And after that, we will move to the closing remark. Dr. Bizhan, one of the questions that came from the audience are the practical steps needed to successfully make this transition from the war economy to a sustainable economic model in Afghanistan. What could the foundations of this transition be like? And it's a very big question. It's a very difficult question to answer, but I would be grateful if you can, in 3 minutes, give us your perceptions, especially in light of the research that you've recently concluded.
Yeah, thank you, Hiba. That's a great question. So what needs to happen in Afghanistan? We need to reorient our national economy because it has been, to a large extent, a rentier economy relying on external resources. So one is to focus on those sectors that can generate employment and hope for people. That's one. Second one is to focus on mega projects. The government in Afghanistan failed to capitalize on projects such as copper mine and others in the last 5 years plus. So those are other areas that can generate hope and employment in Afghanistan. But to do so, the important step is to also change the nature of governance in Afghanistan. We have a new patrimonial political system in Afghanistan where resources are exchanged for political support. So that's another important to improve the quality of government. So there is no like a shortcut blueprint, but in short, I would like to say the government or in Afghanistan, we need to reorient our focus towards a long-term development rather than focusing on short-term projects. Though we need to do both, but that should be one of the important priorities, especially after a post-settlement order.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bizhan, for this intervention. Considering you have been very efficient on timing, I think I can bring in one more question from the audience, and perhaps I could address that to Ms. Sarabi. Ms. Sarabi, one of the questions that came in is the desire to hear your reflection on the challenges of avoiding the politicization of humanitarian aid during the ongoing political negotiations. We've talked a lot about economic leverage, incentives, economic incentives, but how can we trigger that balance of not politicizing aid, especially humanitarian aid, and leveraging economic incentives?
Thank you, but I think that is that's a very sensitive question. One good thing about that Afghanistan and the way the programs have been implemented in the past couple of years is through communities. For example, we have a very big program called Citizens Charter that a few years ago it was called National Solidarity Programs that works through communities. And the basic principle of this program is that it delivers services to everyone, irrespective of where you are. And it delivers services to communities, including those areas that are in conflict or are insecure. And there are special manuals, a special methodology, how to engage with those communities. Going forward, I think one of the insecure districts or insecure communities have been highly deprived from development initiatives or from economic activities, which needs to be tackled. As I said, if you want a very good base to go ahead, we need to make sure that we have an egalitarian or more balanced development or economic interventions. There's also a risk that humanitarian assistance could be politicized from the other side to gain leverage or put pressure on the government. But it also depends a lot on several other neutral actors like the Red Crescent Society and the NGOs, our civil society, who have had a very good record, if I may say, from even during the time of Taliban or before during the civil war, that they delivered services in those communities. I think their role is very crucial in this process. And if you want to go ahead in a very complicated situation, although from the government side, there's much insistence that it has to be government-owned and government-led development processes. But if there is a situation that the humanitarian assistance or service delivery is going to be hampered in the political processes, then the way is to move ahead with neutral agencies and civil society organizations. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Sarabi. And with this, I would really like to thank very much our distinguished speakers for their thought-provoking contributions, pragmatic and concrete recommendations, and reality checks in light of the current challenges. I take a strong sense of cautious optimism at this historic time for Afghanistan. And with this, I would like to pass the floor for closing remarks by the President of Interpeace, Mr. Scott Webber. And I thank you very much. It's been a real pleasure for me to moderate this very interesting panel of very distinguished and eloquent speakers. So thank you very much. Scott, the floor is yours.
Well, first of all, thank you, everybody. Let me say, I think on behalf of all the speakers, I want to thank Hiba for a masterful facilitation of this important discussion. But I really want to thank the Afghan Institute for Security Studies for this partnership on this event, on this important topic, and for all the speakers for their contributions. I have the task of just pulling together a few of the brilliant thoughts and ideas that were shared today, and to leave our viewers with a few thoughts as they go out into the world. Many of them are no doubt going to be contributing to some of these solutions that we've been discussing today. I think one of the commonalities in everything that we've discussed today, and it was the centerpiece of the paper from Dr. Bizhan, is the importance of, for Afghanistan to be on a journey of self-reliance, economic self-reliance in order for the peace to also be sustainable. Now, I think the minister, Mastoor, very eloquently talked about how war has a cost, but so does peace. And you described how a third of the current economy is being devoted towards the fighting, a third is being taken up by the consequences of that fighting, and that leaves only a third to then be invested in trying to maintain a basic level of service delivery for the population. And that with peace, one should at least see the unleashing of those resources to be used differently. And so, well, of course, Afghanistan's going to need additional resources, both aid and other forms of trade and economic development. It will also be able to benefit from regaining some of its own resources and using them differently, unleashing that potential. I think you've all said, and I think Dr. Sarabi was strongest in this, but that we need to be very realistic about what is possible, that international aid will remain a requirement for the foreseeable future. You heard the numbers from Dr. Bizhan as to the at least 6.1 billion, but as much as 8.1 billion will be needed in the next 4 years. Now, the minister was also very pointed in saying that it's not just the amount of money that is going to be needed, it's also how it's used, and the distribution of those funds and the priority setting that will be established is going to be central to the success of these strategies. But before getting into the economic peace-building aspect, I just wanted to talk for a minute, because this came through very strongly in many of the discussions, the issue about the quality of the political settlement. That's I notice I don't say peace process, because in my view, this is just one step along a longer term peace process. So let's talk about this as the political process, the political to search for a political settlement. And there, I think Ambassador de Mistura gave us a very powerful image of what is going to be the quality control assessment from the rest of the world of this political settlement, the thermometer of the seriousness and the potential for this settlement to contribute to longer term peace, and that being ultimately how it will treat women's rights. Of course, other things as well, other gains, but the women's rights issue, I think we can all agree, is going to be central. And we say that, and I think we have to say that, not because it isn't an obvious point, but because that is at risk, actually, in the current process, let's be honest. And we're all worried about how much that is going to be protected throughout the negotiations. But I think Dr. Sarabi also said that we have to not just be maintaining the gains that have been achieved, but also deliberately look to expand those gains over the coming years. That needs to be part of how we view the quality of what is being done now and its potential to contribute to sustainable peace. You also talked, Dr. Sarabi, about the importance in the implementation process of involving the communities in monitoring that peace. And again, that is a question mark. How much is the political settlement going to allow the space for communities to truly participate? That's going to be part of that quality control as well. I would say, to pick up on what Dr. Bizhan said, is that the degree to which this political settlement also starts to change the incentive structures of how the governance system actually manages the economic system of the country, so that it moves from what you call so eloquently in your paper, this limited access order, to a stable access order, and ultimately to an open access order, meaning that all the different constituents of society can really participate in that economy, and that it isn't a locked down economy by an elite. So the degree of quality of that settlement will also be the degree to which it moves those incentive structures away from a limited access order. I would add my own contribution here to say that in our experience with peace processes around the world, one of the things that we see as a constant tension is the tension between the short term and the long term. That often there's a push to seek solutions in the short term, but that ultimately will actually make the longer term stability and peace impossible or much more difficult. And we have to just be very careful that some of the agreements that are reached now actually don't undermine those longer term objectives. And there, I just want to remind everyone, it's taken up a little bit in Dr. Bizhan's paper, the parallel with the Colombia peace process. And I just cite two elements of it that I think are quite important reminders. Is that the first is that the vacuum that was left by the FARC rebels who were fighting against the government and who signed the agreement with the government, the vacuum left by the FARC rebels was then very quickly filled by other actors. And so the degree to which, again, this settlement actually avoids that dynamic of the vacuum being filled by others, and then therefore needing to start over a new set of negotiations with other actors is going to be important. The second point, and one of the lessons from Colombia, is that remember that only 20% of the violence of Colombia was due to the conflict with FARC. Only 20%. And that is one of the reasons why the population of Colombia did not fully support the original peace process with the FARC, because for them, 80% of what made their lives difficult were other dynamics. So let's remember that the dynamic of the negotiations with the Taliban, as important and historic as it is needs to be cast within a wider set of challenges that Afghanistan is still facing. And I'll just finish by on the economic peace building side, Dr. Mastoor, I think the framework that you started to outline to move from DDR to EER to economic empowerment and reintegration, I think is a brilliant way of reframing the real challenge of these things. And I think you gave a very important insight into how all the actors, including the donor conference, should focus its attention going forward so that we look at prioritizing local production capacity and in a customized way that's province to province customized for what they can provide to the country and how to create interdependence within the country. I think that's a very powerful vision for how the economic development focus should be done. I think Dr. Bizhan talked also about the transformation of the informal economy and the transformation of the illegal economy as well being very important. And lastly, just reminding everyone that the donor aid will remain a critical contribution going forward to making all of this possible. And in COVID times, especially, it's important that the international community ring-fence their funding for Afghanistan so that it isn't affected in ways that other budgets might be. So we are, as Ambassador de Mistura said, at a historic moment. So did Dr. Moradian. You both highlighted this. But this is just the beginning of a peace process. This is not a peace process yet. It's just the beginning of a peace process. And the proof will be in the quality, as we said, of this settlement and how in the short term, the solutions that are found do not undermine the longer term prospects for sustainable peace. The proof will be in the implementation of this agreement, whatever agreement is reached, and especially to link to the economics underpinning of the peace. It's going to be the degree to which the economic development of Afghanistan is also inclusive, because we know that sustainable peace is an inclusive peace. That requires an inclusive economy, not an exclusive one. So thank you again, everybody, for what I found to be a fascinating webinar. This is just the beginning of this conversation, and I hope it contributes also to the International Conference on Afghanistan that is due in November. So thank you very much.